Here we go, man. We are live. All right, let me have it.
Welcome to your certain success.
That was good. All right, give me one more. Welcome.
Welcome to your certain success.
That was it. Sweet. Love it. All right, here we go. Hey, guys, welcome back to the Certain Success podcast. And I have been working with our team to build this podcast pretty much so that I could get to this episode and the series of episodes that are going to come behind it with a dear friend that I've been sort of thinking and describing as super guest because A, he's a super guy, and also you're going to hear from this person over and over and over again as we unpack, you kind of month in and month out. We're going to keep unpacking matters of faith and always tying into business, but matters of faith. And so, guys, I'm incredibly excited to introduce you to my next door neighbor, who, if there's, it's like there's a radiating sun coming from the west. And it's actually, there's a literal radiating sun coming from the west where we live, but there's also sunshine coming from the western direction at my property from the powerful Chris Morgan. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Matt. Thanks for having me. Thanks for being my neighbor.
Well, that's a whole podcast of like how that came to be, but I think we would
Sure.
we would certainly agree that there's a special anointing in the 2,000 yard radius around this little area here.
Yeah. I mean, especially when we have, I don't know how long ago it was, but a few months ago we started meeting by the fire out underneath your, or what would you call that little thing behind your
Like
house?
gazebo.
Yeah, gazebo, and we build a fire there, and we have sacred conversation, and I've really enjoyed it.
Well, not everybody gets to have a pastor next door that becomes a good friend, and you've obviously had a huge impact on me, and I'm excited for the fact that now we together get to talk to our audience of entrepreneurs and business owners and sort of normal humans about matters of faith and how that ties to business. And so, guys, I gave Chris some introduction, but Chris is part of, well, I guess what can only be described as a mega church here in Atlanta that I've been part of for 20 years. And for most of those years, Chris was the worship pastor, the lead pastor, and in significant impact. I guess had a significant responsibility that led to that growth, and so has had a significant role. I'm tripping all over it, Chris. So help me out. Can you please explain a little bit about what you've
Sure.
been doing for the last 20 years?
Yeah, so 12 Stone Church is the church, and it's kind of situated around Lawrenceville, which is north of Atlanta. And I've been there 23 years. I actually just walked in there in 1996 looking for a place to go to church with my family.
Mm.
And one thing, another, and ended up going on part-time staff in 1998, then full-time staff out of a business career, out of a sales career, actually 13 years in sales, and then made the hyperspace jump over into full-time 23 years. And honestly, it's just been incredible. Um, Everything's not measured by numbers, but I've gotten to see incredible things. Like just, I've seen God move in ways that I really would have never imagined when I was much younger. Just watching people come to Christ and watching momentum come into that place. And so it's just been, yeah, it's incredible from probably 2000 to maybe 2012 ish, 13, somewhere along in there. I mean, it just grew and grew and grew. It's almost like every time we, opened up a space, um, if we had open seats, God was filling them. Let's put it that way. And it's been quite the journey. So, but I was the worship pastor there up until about 2018. Then I shifted into a role leading a prayer movement there. And so that's sort of currently what I'm doing, centered more around prayer. But prayer and worship, they're like twin sins. Yeah. Twin sisters that hold hands, so they're very similar. But yeah, so I'm now more presiding over a prayer movement, which we can talk some about if you want. But
Yeah, I mean, I think this episode, guys, if you're listening to this is going to be about prayer, how to bake prayer more into your everyday walking around life and into your business. And but before we go there, I want to talk a little bit, just a minute, about the worship stuff, because for me, when I walked into that church 20 years ago, I was one of these raised Catholic, went and then ended up in a season of
right.
like, I'm not even sure there is a God. When I walked into 12 Stone, I was looking to see if there was a God.
Yeah.
And for me, the front door was worship. It was you. More than that senior pastor guy. What's his name again?
I can't remember.
I can't remember either. Anyway, we're kidding, Kevin Myers. But anyway, worship was the absolute entry point for me back to this just like crazy journey of faith from then till now. And I think maybe it's easier for people to enter that way than through prayer first, or maybe it's just different people. But
Oh, for sure.
yeah,
For sure. Music is a shared currency that's at a much lower entry point than talking to God. So and music does things that nobody understands exactly how it works. We just know that it does, and it's amazing. But it's a rallying point. It's a lot like laughter. When you have a room laugh, the room goes from being fragmented to unified, and everybody comes into a shared place. Music does the same thing. When it's done well and done right, it kind of takes a fragmented room and brings it unified into a place. And then from that place, you can actually go somewhere, because everybody's kind of unified. So it doesn't make sense. I mean, it makes sense to me that you would say it that way, that like, yeah, I may not have gotten this, but the music was a front door for me.
Well, and there's so much emotion in music, and
Totally.
then the expression of worship with music, that it sort of gives you that initial warm and fuzzy God, right? The sort of the newness, and prayer might take an extra minute to get there in the same way, or for me, in my case, 20 years to get there.
Well, the truth of it is, again, it's familiarity. Everybody is familiar. They may not be familiar with using music for worship, but they're very familiar with music. And that's a lot less true of prayer. We all know what prayer is. We've heard about it, but we have a lot less experience with it. Personally doing it, but also just being in the environment where it's happening even. Again, there's more to be said there, but you get what I mean.
Well, that's a good segue to prayer, but guys, if you're listening to this and now you already understand why Chris and I are going to do this over and over and over again, because we could talk about 100 different subjects, but worship has got to be the next one, I would think. But we're all here because we're business owners, we're entrepreneurs, we're people walking around in the real world, and I represent all the sinners in this conversation, and Chris represents all the saints, and we're going to bring them all the
That's
cards
not
to
fair.
the. I know, and guys, we're playing, right? I mean, we're playing, but the conversation is how do we bring all this faith stuff and for today's conversation specifically prayer into our everyday walking around life. And in my notes, the first thing I wrote was don't make it weird, because for some reason prayer always gets weird. You and I were talking the other day about prayer in a group setting, and I was like, I can do it, like, because I like to hear my own voice, but but it makes me it always gets weird. It's like, oh dear Lord, and it's like it has to get
Sure.
all weird and wordy. So how do we not make it weird?
Well, I mean, prayer, let's start by being honest. I mean, first of all, prayer's a little bit weird because we're having a conversation with somebody we can't see. and who we can hear, but we don't really hear him out loud. So the nature of the conversation is completely different than all the other conversations that we're used to having in life. So, I mean, that stacks the deck in a little bit different frame, but let's set that aside for a second and let's talk about how we compound weirdness. We make it weird. We make it more weird because we begin to perform a lot of times, I think, in prayer rather than just talking, like we for some reason when it comes to prayer, people almost by reflex get into this lane where they begin to, you can see them, you can see it in their eyes, you can see it in their mental processes, that they're actually self-editing as they're talking. They're fixated on what it sounds like as if there's some kind of pastoral masterpiece version of a prayer sentence that's supposed to sound a certain way. And that's what makes it valid. And of course, that's actually not what makes it valid. It's part of what makes it strange. We say weird, but let me put a better word to it: inauthentic. Because as soon as prayer is into authenticity, it never sounds weird. Now, it may sound insecure, but listen, isn't insecurity one of the things that makes life beautiful? It's like when you see somebody being honest but insecure, we go like, that's real. But when it's pretense and decorative and performing, we go like, how fast can I get out of here? Because we all want, why? Because we all want something that's real. And I think that's particularly true now. It's always been true, but I think we're living in a culture now where basically the heart of the culture is, look, it's either real or I'm out. And I'm only going to give you just a short period of time, to manifest that, to demonstrate that.
Yeah, like
It's either,
7 seconds.
yeah, it's either real or I'm out. The good news is there's no reason why it can't be real, because heaven's invitation is so simple, like a first grader could understand it. It's like, if you're weary and heavy laden, which most of us, could sign up for that, he says, then come to me. Come to me. Come. If you're thirsty, come. You actually can have food, like metaphorically speaking, you can have food and drink, and it's free. It's already been paid for, and it tastes good, but you got to come. And here's what I know. I have a grandson. He's only 2 years old, and if I said, hey, come here, he knows what I mean. So it's not that complicated. It's, you have to show up, you have to come, but in coming, come authentic. And honestly, we stumble there, I think, because we don't have any, we I think sometimes when people are super uncomfortable, you talked about public prayer. I think sometimes when people are uncomfortable with that, it's because they haven't really done a lot of it in private. I'm not saying that's true of you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it is. I don't know, but I know that contributes. It's like, well, what do words said to God sound like coming out of my mouth?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you've never heard that,
Mm-hmm.
like you've never done a lot of it, you don't really know what it sounds like. And now you actually got people listening. So what do? You actually defer to what you heard the pastor do, or like what you think it's supposed to sound like.
Say like an Our Father who art in heaven kind of prayer. And
Yeah.
no, I think, well, and now I'm realizing that's it's a different meaning. There's like, we have to walk the line in this conversation, because I'm thinking of this in the context of prayer in your business, prayer for your business, prayer with your team,
Sure.
and all of that. Sure. But there is a different conversation, a separate conversation about what's my prayer life privately and then what's my prayer life in business. And in my case, my private prayer life has become less about the words. There's not that, I think I said this to you, like there's not that many words. There's a lot of intention. There's a lot of focus. There's a lot of listening, and there's not that many, Our Father who art in heavens. And then when you're praying in front of other people, it's very, very difficult to not end up thinking about how the words, instead of thinking about the word, how the words sound to him, you're thinking about how the words sound to them.
That's right. That's 100% right. And I totally get how we would talk about, I mean, no question. There's a personal side of prayer, and then when you there is this conversation of, okay, how does prayer potentially play into me as a owner or somebody who's leading other people? How does prayer maybe play into that? And I get how those are different conversations, but we also have to acknowledge, whether we talk about personal prayer or about prayer applied in more public situations or leadership situations, we have to acknowledge that the private is connected to the public always. Always.
Hmm.
The public without the private is recipe for pretense and will always fail. It'll always, let me say it this way, it fails a bad word, it will fall flat and nobody will believe it.
It'll be
And you
empty.
just to avoid it, honestly. But if it's real here, then you're much better set up for any application as a leader of other people. And I don't know how you want to go about this. I mean, I have tons of thoughts that start firing off in terms of what's smart, what's perhaps not all that smart, but I'll let you ask the questions
Hmm.
and I'll try to.
Well, I want to keep it in the context of, I picture myself as a business owner who are, at the moment, I don't have any employees, and I definitely don't have anybody in my physical space. So if I was praying with my virtual team, it would be on Zoom, and we could do that. Actually, that's a great idea. We should do that. But I picture the lady or gent listening to this that's like, man, I got a team at work, and I want to try to actually pray with my team, but we don't do that right now, and I don't want to make it weird. And how does that work? And you already gave, so I'm going to ask you, like, how do I do that? You already gave the first piece of advice, which is it starts privately, because like you can't take that to the group if you're not winning it in your private space. But
Yeah, well,
go ahead.
I would start by challenging the presupposition. So, in other words, if I'm a leader and my first thought is I want to bring, is there a way in which I could bring prayer into my team or those that I lead in a business context? I would say first and foremost that if you ultimately do that, the only way that that would feel normalized in any way is that way preceding that, you've already brought in you as somebody whose life is couched in the practice of prayer. So you walk in, you're already carrying that atmosphere with you. And I know what that looks like. I mean, I know how that plays out. Let's put it that way. So, and it wouldn't be that unlike a lot of the conversations that you and I've had. It's like we talk about a variety of things, A, B, C, D, whatever it is, but always somehow the atmosphere of who God is, what He's done, and the place that He plays in my life decorates the conversation. It doesn't always have to be the main thing. In fact, it often is not the main thing, but it's always around the edges. And that's where people get comfortable with, hey, Matt's a person of prayer. How do you know? Have you guys prayed together? No, we hadn't necessarily prayed together, but it always sits around the edges of who he is. And in everything he does, it is decorating the scene. It's decorating the atmosphere. It's infused in subtle ways in every conversation. Now, when that begins to happen, what do we call that? Well, that's culture. It's the culture of who you are. The culture of who you are is flowing out of your history with God that you've built in private, and now it's playing out in public. And here's what I know: enough time, enough history in private with God, then His voice in your life goes public, and that's when other people begin to see it. They go like, "Oh, I know who you are." I remember when I was in sales, and this is just, to me, it was just a notable story because I just thought, how did that happen? But I was working at a Mercedes-Benz dealership, a really nice place to work. But the owner of the place, this is one of those establishments that the owner actually worked on the premises, and you know, she was a delightful person, but she could get kind of salty. Like if she got mad, she could kind of, profanity laced conversation could come into play. But I just thought it was interesting. I was in a room and there was, like, I don't know, maybe three of us and her, and she was in the conversation. She was mad about something, and man, she started just going off. And it was interesting because she started going off, and then she paused and she looked at me and she apologized. But then she and I'd never had a conversation with her about faith or anything like that. I'd never had any kind of like context for why she would pause, look at me, and apologize. But I know what that is. It's the atmosphere of who God is follows you. When you build history with God, it chases you into whatever you're doing, and it affects everything you're doing. And so the proper context for then prayer or anything else related to kingdom, his kingdom, becomes more, it has a context. Now it doesn't feel weird because they're going like, well, that's who Chris is. It seems real. Or that's who Matt is. It seems real. It doesn't seem put on. It doesn't feel forced. Because that, right? Prayer is going to feel weird if you invite people who have no context for it and they don't exactly even know you that way. And all of a sudden you show up and go like, hey, I just think it might be a good idea if we pray today. They're going to go like,
Huh?
what?
Yeah.
What? Of course it's going to seem weird. But I guarantee you it won't seem weird if they know you that way and it's authentic in you. And I'm not even saying that I think it's something to aspire towards. Like if I were leading a business, I wouldn't necessarily have it as a goal of that I'm going to pray with my team. But I would definitely have it as a goal that if I ever wanted to, that it wouldn't seem weird. Does that make
Mm.
sense? Like
It
that's
does.
a different.
It does, and I don't think you and I knew exactly where this conversation was going to go, and I think that's part of the beauty of it. But I think where we're landing, or the lane we're in, is how do I bake it into my personal life before it goes more public. So again, remember the context is I'm a business owner, and maybe I'm new in my faith, or maybe I've been walking with the bumpers up of like, this is my business life, and then my God life's over there. It's either on Sunday or it's whatever, but it's not in my walking around everyday life. And I wanna bake it in more. And I think we spend the rest of this little conversation on there, and then maybe it's a different conversation about, okay, maybe I won that, or I won it to some extent. Now I can talk about taking it public with my team and all of that. But talk to me just in that context, Chris. I'm like, man, I want more baked in Jesus of every minute of every day in the business context, because that's what I spend, and all of us who are listening here, we all spend our day, I don't know right now if you're driving in your car listening to this, or you're at the gym, or where you are, but you're just up around walking around every day, and statistically the odds are good that every minute of every day is not, prayer without ceasing, as it were. So talk to me about that.
Well, I think that I think about the difference between my life with God and prayer specifically as one more thing on my list that's important to me that I want to see be part of my life shaping. So it becomes, like one thing on my list as opposed to a relationship that I'm investing in. So everything in his kingdom is relationally baked. And, my relationship with you would never work if you were just one thing on my list that I'm checking off, right? There's a level of engagement that is, um, I don't think, hold on a second. Ask that question a different way. So obviously we'll have to do some editing here because I think it's an important question, but I think I'm stumbling on the answer right now. So ask it a different way.
Well, and it's just us chatting, and maybe that's informative to. It is for me anyway, in terms of the way my conversations with God go now. Is that finally, after so many years, it's become just conversational like this. And if I trip on my words, or my words get salty, or whatever it is, I just speak in those words. And that's a whole nother episode that you and I are doing about them salty words that I love. But I speak to him in my voice. I
Yeah,
actually,
of
actually,
course.
actually hit my open palm on the table. Maybe it was yesterday morning, and like in kind of frustration. It was like, oh gosh, like I want this, right or wrong,
Yes.
right or wrong. This is what I want, but I said it in like with that much passion, and I think that is a little bit of a foreign language to somebody who is just starting to approach it of like I can't talk to God like that. Like I gotta just bring
Right.
him. So
Right.
does that help?
Yeah. I mean, I would say this. Here's some handholds. Like if you're trying to like, if prayer and the pursuit of God is more of an early pursuit, or even maybe you've been in it for a while, but you're just looking to increase, like authenticity in relationships is always desirable. You like it, I like it, everybody likes it. Turns out heaven likes it. So learning how to be just showing up and learning how to be honest and authentic with in my conversation with God. So how do you think about that? Well, think about it as I have to learn, just like I have to learn in my marriage, just like I have to learn in my friendships. I have to learn how to show up able to say what I think, process how I feel, and be able to articulate at some level, what do I want? And I have found, like, when I'm having a hard time finding words, I direct myself back to those three questions. What do I think? How do I feel? What do I want? And and that's the moment, like, if when we find authentic words, that is the place where there's more likely to be a change of tone in my voice, because now I'm starting to feel something. Now I'm starting to hit authentic places, like where I'm working on something. And it's like I think we think in our relationship with God and in prayer, there's a certain quadrant of things we should be talking about. But these business problems that got me all tied up and in knots, or personal problems in marriage that had me all tied up and in knots, are just something I want that happened yet, and I'm tired of waiting. You know, we self edit out the authenticity. And so, like, I love the picture, like when you talk about slamming your hand down on a desk in a moment of frustration and talking to God, I go like, now we're talking, because now there's actual real conversation taking place. And here's what I mean, look, sometimes we just have to like arrest these dumb thoughts that we have. It's like, is my prayer truly informing God? Like, is he waiting to go like,
I didn't
what's he
realize
gonna
that.
say? What's he, what is he gonna say? Like scripture basically already says the Father knows what you need before you even ask him. So he already knows. Here's the deal. You need to say it more than he needs to hear it.
Mm.
And in the saying, there's an authenticity and a breaking of pretense that happens between you and him that changes you. And it launches you into new places of not just in your relationship with him, but also just self growth. Like you're maturing, you're becoming more of who God created you to be, because you've learned how to have a voice with the living God. Like, what is prayer? Well, it's the very first step of prayer is just show up. And
Mm.
then it's open up. And it's like, so these are really simple. These are not complex maneuvers. They're not easy, particularly to do over and over and over and over, but just learn how to show up. And what does that mean? Well, I know what it meant for me and you. Like when we decided to start meeting and burning fires at your gazebo and having sacred conversation of one nature or another, like it started with picking up one of these. It's like, hey, when are you available?
Mm.
You know? Oh, I can do this. And then there's texting, and we're trying to do what? We're just trying to work out a time to show up.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to do the same in a most basic way of a prayer pursuit. When are you going to show up? And then when you show up, how do you learn to open up and
Mm.
find work? And I think that's the authenticity. What do you think? How do you feel? What do you want? And look in your scripture. How many times did Jesus show up in situations where the need was obvious and he went like, what do you want me to do for you today?
I love that piece. That's just how he keeps asking that question as if he didn't know the answer. But I want to go one level deeper because
Yep.
I did some writing the other day that just exploded in my head about suspending the disbelief in the way that when you walk into a movie and you sit down to be entertained or whatever, but like at a subconscious level, you just know without even thinking about it that like I got to suspend my disbelief long enough for these characters to capture my attention in my heart. And once I'm invested in the characters and like, okay, I can believe this even though it's super not real. And I think that for me for a long time, and maybe for a lot of people listening to this, is this gap between why I can't fully show up is because I get there and I'm like, I don't know that there's anybody on the other end of the phone here.
Totally.
And so, and I also think that it's interesting to think about that in terms of, we talked about marketing and avatars and like who you're writing to, like one specific person. And I actually realized in hindsight that kind of mental gymnastics has been helpful to me in wrapping my brain around who I'm talking to when I'm talking to God. What do you think of that?
100%. No, I think that's 100%. I think, Tozer said, A.W. Tozer, I can't quote it exactly, but basically said the most important thing about any of us is who we conceive God to be. Like, what do we think he's like? And at a fundamental level, when you do the math and you go all the way back to what are the implications of that, they're massive. They're massive. And to your point, will absolutely be infectious in a good way or a bad way to how you speak to him and how you pursue him. And in fact, this is in scripture. I mean, scripture in the book of Hebrews, it says it's without faith, it's impossible to please God. That we can't just believe that he is, or we should believe that he is, but we should also believe that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. So when you have that in mind, like when you go like, this is who I'm talking to. And there's all kinds of other things. Jesus, when he sought to give us a picture of what God was like, he called him Father. And he reinforced that over and over and over. So what's he doing? Well, he's framing up. How should you think about this relationship? So when you start putting all these different inspired ways of looking in God, it leads to inspired action with God.
Hmm.
And in of an inspired way of looking at God, you might take action, but it probably won't be inspired action because you left out some of the key ingredients of like, who are you talking to? What is he like? What might happen? Another piece, like, scripture says without faith it's impossible to please God. Not only that he is, but he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. But then right after, scripture also says with God, nothing will be impossible. Who am I talking to? I'm talking to the one who possibility or impossibility is fiction, right? There's nothing he can't do. It's fiction. Like, but that's not true for me. It's not true for you. So the conversation context is completely blown for anything else we've ever experienced, because we're now talking to somebody who is a father, who is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him, and has no limitations. Okay, well, those are just, and that's just three pieces, like, of who it is I'm talking to. But listen, yes, I could go on and on, but like, I totally buy into what you're saying, that having a right sized picture of who I'm talking to will absolutely inform how I speak, how I talk. And and I'll go a step further, because I think this is true, and there's a lot to unpack here. But like, I think we end up praying small sometimes, not because we have a small view of God. In other words, we believe, hey, I think he's good. I think he can do anything. I just don't think he'll do that for me.
Yeah, for sure.
And what that then causes me to do in both counts, like whether I've mis framed who God is, or whether I have misframed my position in the conversation, both will cause me to pray really small.
Mm.
And when you pray small, you stop praying,
Well, you stop
because it
taking
doesn't.
this last little bit, and it might be a big bit, is what you and I have been talking about, and you just mentioned is take inspired action. And so, for all of us in this conversation today, where it lands is you'd pray more if you thought he was really there, and if you actually thought something was going to come out of it. But what keeps something from coming out of it is the lack of inspired action that comes afterward. So you go into prayer, you ask God, he tells you, and then what I do is I go, I don't think he'll really do that for me. I think he's capable, but I don't think he'll do it for me. I don't deserve it.
Totally.
So I'm not going to
Totally.
go take that inspired action because I don't trust him to deliver on it. And then we're going to cycle back to the mental masturbation we talked about. I know you love that phrase, where I go, oh, well, let me pray about it again. Cause maybe he didn't actually say what I think he said, because he wouldn't do that for me. So I'm going to pray about it again and see if there's a different answer there, over and over and over again. And all I had to do was walk out and take inspired action and do what I heard, and believe that he's going to do it for me, but I can't. How do I do that, Chris?
So what you're saying, if I understand what you're saying, so you're saying, like we build prayer, but then from prayer we actually take inspired action. Is that what you're saying? And how is that done?
Yeah, I'm saying I think that's the faith gap. So we talked about the fact of the mental avatar of like, this is who God is, and I'm talking to a real human, and we're both really there, and I can pound my hand on the table because I'm not talking to myself, I'm talking to him. And then something is going to come out of that. It might just be a gut feeling, it might be, but there's an answer there to whatever the conversation was about. I'm going to come away with a feeling of, this is what I think, where that leading was. And I think what stops me and you and y'all from taking action on that is that piece right there, where you're like, immediately you're like, I'm not worthy. He won't do that for me. I can't take action because I'm afraid that he won't deliver.
Well, I would say this. I would say, number one, there's a few things that come to mind. Number one, this is you're highlighting the importance of building history with God. Because when you build history with God, you now have data. You have actual, you can actually look back and go like, oh, I remember this, and I remember that, and I remember this. So you actually can draw from the past and say, and it helps mitigate that self-editing and that self-doubt, and that shuts down forward momentum. And if you look in scripture, they do it all the time. I mean, a big part of worship and in the Psalms, it's like, God, we remember when you did this. We remember when you did that. We remember when you did this. So that's actually a really good exercise. And bake that, honestly, bake that in gratitude. Like when you remember what he's done and then you bake that inside of gratitude, it actually postures you then in the proper humility. You begin to take the inspired action, as you call it. But here's what I would recommend. Like, have specific conversations with God. Why don't you just ask him to do something and ask him specifically and then write it down and then do that again. Add diligence, just like you add diligence to whatever business you're working on. Add some diligence to your relational pursuit of God in prayer and write down specifically what you're asking him to do
Mm.
and then see what happens. Because my suspicion is you give it enough time and enough prayer, you're going to see outcomes. And when you begin to see outcomes, look, any smart person, that's all they need. They need to see, I take this action, I get this outcome.
Mm.
Don't hear me wrong. Prayer can never turn into solely a transactional thing because it's always relational. But if you see action that turns into outcome, you're motivated. You're motivated. In fact, listen, every relationship on planet Earth is motivated by the experience of that relationship. That's the way it works. If you and I had been bored over the first two conversations we had, we would have stopped texting each other. There's
Mm-hmm.
no there's no momentum because the experience of the relationship is boring or it has no result. But when the relationship actually bears fruit, you go like, "Oh, that was good. That tasted good. Let's do it again." That's the same thing you're trying to build with God in prayer. And I would say the more specific you can do, keep notes, like document it. If that's the kind of person you are, like you need to see it, well, he'll show you. He'll show you. Now, the other thing I would say, as you take inspired action, and this is where it gets a little nuanced, take inspired action, but begin to train your ears for the whisper. Because I haven't found him to be a shouting God, practically. Like, there's a whole lot more whispering than there is shouting. And I'm like, God, would you speak up? Would you do this a little louder? Because I think I hear a whisper, but I really feel still kind of tentative. I'd love a shout. Well, here's what I've learned. I've learned that if you tune to the whisper, it's there, number one. Number two, when you tune to the whisper, the volume begins to increase. Like when you hear the whisper, you go like, I hear you. Well, all of a sudden, the volume's here and it begins to go like this. It begins to increase. It begins to, and you're hearing it more conversational level, then maybe even a shout. So it's like take inspired action, but continue to pay attention to the sacred conversation as it's
Mm.
going, because you'll find he's present in the inspired action. And he may even go like, hey, Matt, not, not left, right, like, don't do it the way you're doing it. You may hear that, or you may go like, that's it. You're right on it. Keep going, keep going, keep going. But the good news is, the really good news is, he's there.
Mm.
He's there. He's there. And when you don't know what to do, I'll never forget when I was in sales, I was over in Decatur working at the Mercedes Benz dealership. And, there's nothing worse than being in sales and you've worked for 2 weeks and you've made $0. And I would just go out and just start walking circles around the used car building, I'm and around the inventory. And I'm just talking to God. And again, I never said this to anybody, but I remember one of the guys that worked there, he knew what I was doing. I don't know how he knew, but he just knew. And he opened the door to the side door of the building and he called out to me walking around the parking lot. He said, hey, throw one up for me while you're out there. Like, so there's atmosphere of relationship with God that gets created around this. And I was talking to him because I'd done everything I knew to do to take inspired action to start selling, and nothing was working. And so I'm just out there going like, "Hey, you're gonna have to do something." And I'm not gonna be silent about this. I'm gonna keep talking, and I trust that you want good things for me, and you're not working against me. Because anybody that's been in sales and you go dry for a minute, it starts feeling that way. It's like the universe has conspired against me. I may never sell anything ever again. It's like that feeling.
Well,
But
I want to pull you back. You said something in there, and I don't know how if you said it quite like this, but what I heard was something like it's like building reps, like you're lifting, and
yeah,
so. But if you don't document the reps, anybody who's spent any time in the gym goes like, you have to document what you did so you know when you go back,
yep,
like, okay, am I making progress, whatever. And
yep,
you throw up this business prayer of like, Lord, please let me close this deal, whatever it is. And then you close it, but you didn't write it down that you asked. You forgot that you asked, and you like just go running down the road. How many times have I done that? Like, God, please help me
totally.
close this deal. And then forget to thank him, forget that he even did that for me. It's a little easier, at least for me, it's a little easier. I'll call it like the holy crap prayer. Like, oh my God, I got to save me again. Like, I need to be saved from this. And then how many times over all these decades now I can look back and go like, he saved me from that, and he saved me from that, and he saved me. Like, I've been in this hole before, and he showed up and saved me. And so I've got those reps like to look back on. But how many reps did I forget about? And I want you to kind of riff on that for a second, because I think that's where you were on it, but not long enough of, I think, helping us all understand how you build that muscle of
Yeah.
actually believing that he's going to show up.
Well, it's interesting when we are in desperate places, we put it all on him, and then when we get the breakthrough, we often take the credit. It's just kind of the reflex, and you just got to over time you break the reflex. But here's what I could tell you: like, here's that I found to be true, that in a way, what you pray for tunes your eyes to what you see. And again, authenticity, I'm presupposing authenticity because I'm not just talking about a prayer that's kind of haphazardly tossed up. Because if you're like, God, I've done all this, and right before I go in, God, help me close the deal, and then you close it, more than likely you're going to walk out and go like, man, I'm amazing. Did you see what I said in that key moment? Like, it just was a piece of work. And then you're going to tell all your coworkers, you guys should try this phrase because it really works. And all that's fine. But like, um, but here's the thing. It's like what you pray for is what you see. Like, what I bring before God is actually training my eyes to see the future differently. Particularly as I pray authentically, but then I carry it forward into inspired action, and I'm still looking for the whisper. What helps me see the whisper? What I, my eyes are being trained by prayer, by time with God. Maybe is a better way to say it. Just I'm spending the time, and I'm bringing authentic things before Him. That actually trains my eyes now as I go into inspired action to see that He's there. And that's the importance. One of the importance of prayer is like, if I don't do that, it doesn't mean he's not there. It just means I don't see him.
Mm-hmm.
See him, I don't recognize or give him credit. And there's no history being built with God. It's just the Matt show or the Chris show, or like it's like my life is mine, and there's no true collaboration. And here's the thing, think about it this way. Here's a good way to think about it. Think about proactive versus reactive. If we stay in the reactive mode of prayer all our lives, we're never going to really be in that place where we're giving God credit, because our life is built upon this thing where we're just getting in trouble and we're going like, God, I need you, God, I need you. And then it breaks through and then we move on. But proactive prayer is a little different. Proactive prayer is like making an investment. Like, so like if you became a financial investor, when you expect returns, like you're taking hard, diligent actions with your money because you expect to see an outcome. Well, that's the way prayer works, proactively speaking. I make choices to do things I otherwise wouldn't do because I want to make an investment, because I want to see an outcome. And when I see the connection of how that works, then I'm willing to continue to make the investment to get the outcome. But here's the thing, don't miss this. Like, it's not just that I get the outcomes, it's that in that investment to outcome paradigm, that's our pattern that's happening over and over, a relationship is being built and history with God is actually being created. And that's the whole point, narrative, if you will. That's the whole story that actually God's inviting us to. Business and what we do with our lives is the side narrative. It's actually knowing God personally that he's invited us into. And everything else is just what we get to do to create outcomes in our life,
Huh.
like
You know,
financial outcomes.
I just started, I thought, my business is the gym. So like God gave me this place to go work out, but what I'm working out is my relationship with him, like how to actually finish or get somewhere here in him. But like the gym that I work that out in is the marketplace, right? And dude, we have to wrap this up because
Absolutely.
we're getting past a bite-sized morsel. But hey guys, does your next door neighbor talk like this guy? So probably not. Be jealous because my next door neighbor talks like this.
Stop it.
And I hope that was awesome for you guys and useful in some way. And if you enjoyed this on the Certain Success podcast, please hit the old subscribe button and maybe rate this episode as one of the best. And Chris, I hope you'll be back here real soon.
Of course, you just invite me, and I just want to give you honor as well, Matt, just to tell your audience that, I get just as much from our conversations as you say you get from me. So it's reciprocal.
Cool. Well, I hope he's smiling at us both for this conversation. And guys, we'll see you back here on the Certain Success podcast. Have a great day. All right, Chris, now you got to do the stay faithful, my friends.
Stay faithful, my friends.
All right, do one more.
Stay faithful, my friends.
I like that one better. Awesome. Well, I'm going to close this.
All right.